Who was Jesus before the creation of the world, before Bethlehem, before Mary, before the first star burned in the black? Who was he? He answered that question himself, not through a council of bishops centuries later. In his own words, in rooms where the reaction was recorded, and the reactions were violent. The people who heard him picked up stones. They tore their robes at midnight. They fell to the ground when he spoke his name. He was not misunderstood. He was understood perfectly. And they treated his words as a capital offense. In this video, we are going to trace every claim Jesus made about who he was before Bethlehem. From the earliest hymns the church was singing within 30 years of the crucifixion, through the synoptic Gospels, into the temple where they tried to stone him, and all the way to a prayer he prayed on the last night of his life. The most extraordinary thing he ever said about himself. He said to his Father, "Before the world existed." That is the question. Let us find out. Jerusalem. Thursday night, the night before the crucifixion. 13 men in a borrowed room. The meal is on the table. The lamps are lit. And Jesus knows he is about to die. In these last hours before the arrest, he does not retreat into silence. He does not withdraw. He speaks more directly about who he is than at any other point in his 3 years of public ministry. As if time is running out, and the restraint he has maintained for 3 years is finally coming off. Before we hear the big claims, notice the small ones. In this one evening, Jesus says he was sent by the Father. Not born into a mission, not called to a purpose, sent. He uses this language over 40 times across the Gospel of John, and it hides in plain sight. Most readers walk right past it. But look at what the word actually claims. You can only be sent from a place you were already in. Every time Jesus says, "The Father who sent me," he is making a quiet, persistent, unspoken pre-existence claim. It is embedded in the verb, "let that land." He does not say, "God called me." He says, "God sent me." Called implies you were already here. Sent implies you were somewhere else. Every time. And then the claims get louder. John chapter 14, verse 6. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Not a way among many. The way. Not a truth among competing truths. The truth. Not a life offered to those who qualify. The life. Every article definite. Every noun exclusive. John chapter 16, verse 28. "I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I am leaving the world and going to the Father." His earthly life bookended by a prior existence and a return. He describes his life on earth as a temporary departure from where he belongs. He came from somewhere. He is going back to somewhere. And where he came from is where he is going. Then Philip speaks up. Philip has been with Jesus for 3 years. He has heard the teaching. He has seen the miracles. He has watched water become wine and blind eyes open. And Philip, in this last night, asks the question every disciple has probably wanted to ask from the beginning. "Lord, show us the Father. Just once. Let us see him. And that will be enough for us." Jesus answers, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." Philip asked to see God. Jesus said, "You are looking at him." And then, quietly, in the intimacy of the meal, Jesus says something that in any other setting would have caused a riot. John chapter 13, verse 19. "I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am." The absolute ego eimi, the divine name, spoken not to enemies in a public confrontation, spoken to his closest followers, at the table, as a credential. Even here, in the room with the men he trusts, the claim is on the table. Before the evening was over, he prayed. And what he said in that prayer, addressed to his Father, in the hearing of his disciples, is the most explicit claim to pre-existence in the entire Bible. We will get to it. But the evidence comes first, because critics will tell you these claims only appear in John, that John was written last, written late, and reflects theology the real Jesus never taught. That objection is serious, and it deserves a serious answer. I came from the Father and have come into the world, before the world existed. The most explicit pre-existence claims do appear in John, the latest Gospel, written around 90 AD, roughly 60 years after the crucifixion. Some scholars argue these statements reflect later theological development, not historical memory, that the historical Jesus never made such claims, that John put words in his mouth to serve a developing Christology. This is a real objection. It has been made by serious scholars. Let us see if it holds. The earlier Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptics, contain the same claim, not implicit, explicit. Matthew chapter 22, Mark chapter 12. Jesus poses a question to the Pharisees. If the Messiah is the son of David, how does David himself, writing under the inspiration of the Spirit in Psalm 110, call the Messiah his Lord? The question only works if the answer contains a paradox. The Messiah is David's descendant. He will come from David's line, but he is also David's Lord. He already existed in David's own time, 1,000 years earlier, ranking above him. Jesus does not answer the question. He lets it hang in the air. The Pharisees cannot answer it either, because the answer is standing in front of them. David's pre-existent Lord, his descendant, both. Mark chapter 14, verse 62. The trial before the Sanhedrin. Late at night, the high priest, exhausted from failed witnesses and contradictory testimony, asks the question directly, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus, who has been mostly silent through the proceedings, answers with absolute clarity, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man, seated at the right hand of power, and coming with the clouds of heaven." This is a direct claim to be the heavenly figure of Daniel chapter 7, one who descends from heaven, who receives dominion and glory from the Ancient of Days himself. And the high priest understood it. He tore his robe, the prescribed judicial act for blasphemy. He did not need clarification. He did not ask a follow-up. He tore his robe and called for the death sentence. He heard exactly what Jesus said. That is the synoptic evidence, and it is not the earliest evidence. Paul's letter to the Philippians was written around 60 to 62 AD, roughly 30 years after the crucifixion, 3 decades before John wrote a word of his gospel, and embedded in Philippians chapter 2, recognizable to scholars by its structure, its rhythm, its elevated Greek, is what is widely identified as a pre-Pauline hymn, a song the early church was already singing before Paul wrote it down. Paul quotes it because his readers already know it. The words are these: "Though he existed in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made in the likeness of men." This is not John imposing developed theology decades after the fact. This is a hymn Christians were singing within 20 to 30 years of the crucifixion, describing Jesus as one who existed in the form of God before he took on human nature. The pre-existence claim is not a late invention. It is as old as Christianity itself, older than most of the New Testament, sung in worship before the Gospels were even written. And notice the word, emptied. In Greek, the noun form is kenosis. He was in the form of God. He did not cling to it. He set it aside. He emptied himself. He chose the form of a servant. This is not something that happened to him. It is something he did on purpose. Remember that word, kenosis. It comes back at the end. Paul says the same thing to the Colossians. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Same author, same claim, same decade. Christ is not a creature within creation. He is the one in whom creation holds together. But there is one more piece, and it is different from everything else we have heard so far, because every verse we have looked at is either Jesus speaking or an apostle writing. Jesus makes the claim. Paul quotes the hymn. But Hebrews chapter 1 does something no other passage does. Hebrews chapter 1 quotes the Father speaking about the Son. But about the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever." The Father, God himself, calls the Son God. And then, quoting Psalm 102, a psalm originally addressed to Yahweh, the Creator of heaven and earth, the Father says to the Son, "You, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands." The Father attributes creation to the Son, using a psalm originally addressed to Yahweh. This is not Jesus claiming it for himself. This is not Paul writing it in of the Father himself. But there is one statement Jesus made, 7 words, that produced the most violent reaction of his entire ministry. And it happened in the middle of the temple. They were singing it within a generation. Paul wrote it. Mark recorded it. The Father said it. Before the world existed. That night in the upper room, he said the words "I am" to his disciples quietly, at the table, as a credential. But that was not the first time he had spoken those words. Months before that night in the temple courts, he had said them in front of his enemies, and the reaction was immediate. John chapter 8. The temple courts, a public argument with the Pharisees that has been escalating for chapters. Jesus has called himself the light of the world. He has told them they will die in their sins unless they believe that I am. He has claimed that Abraham rejoiced to see his day. And now the Pharisees make their challenge. You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Jesus answers with 7 words, and he chose every one of them with surgical precision. Before Abraham was, I am. 7 words. And they contain the most direct claim to divine identity that Jesus ever made in public. Because he does not say before Abraham was, I was. That would only claim age, that he existed before Abraham, that he was older than Abraham, that he had lived longer than Abraham. Instead, he uses 2 completely different Greek verbs in deliberate contrast. Before Abraham Genestai came into being, was born, had a beginning. I am. Present tense. Continuous existence. No beginning, no end. Abraham was generated. Jesus simply is. The construction does not break grammar. It breaks expectation. The present tense, where past tense should appear, forces the listener to confront the claim head-on. Jesus is not saying he is old. He is saying he is eternal. He exists outside of time itself. Abraham had a birthday. Jesus does not. And the phrase I am did not come from nowhere. Every Jew in that temple courtyard knew where it came from. The traditional link is to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. The burning bush, Moses standing on holy ground, God revealing his name, I am who I am. That connection is real and resonant. It is the name. But the closer linguistic match is in Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 43, verse 10, God declares, You are my witnesses, that you may know and believe me, and understand that I am He. Before me no God was formed, nor will there be one after me. In Hebrew, Anihu. In the Greek Septuagint that Jesus' audience read, Ego eimi. the exact phrase Jesus uses, Isaiah 41, verse 4, Isaiah 48, verse 12. The same formula. Yahweh's declaration of sole, exclusive, eternal deity. Jesus is not merely quoting a name, he is claiming the identity behind it. The God who declares himself the only one, from everlasting to everlasting. And the crowd knew it. So they picked up stones to throw at him. Leviticus chapter 24, verse 16. The penalty for blasphemy is death by stoning. They did not misunderstand him. They understood perfectly, and they responded with the punishment the Torah prescribed for a man who claims to be God. And this was not the only time. 2 chapters later, John chapter 10, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And the Pharisees pick up stones again. Jesus asks them, For which good work are you going to stone me? And they answer with the clearest interpretation of his claim in the entire New Testament. For blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. They said it, in their own words. Not you claim to be a great teacher. Not you are delusional. They said, You are making yourself God. The opponent does the interpretive work for the viewer. They understood exactly what he was claiming, and they told us. Whatever any modern reader might think Jesus was really claiming, the men in the temple who heard him with their own ears, who spoke his language natively, who lived in his culture, they heard a man claiming to be God, and they wanted to kill him for it. And then, later that same week, the garden, Gethsemane, late at night. Judas leads a detachment of soldiers and temple guards through the olive trees, torches, swords, clubs. They come to arrest him. Who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. And he answers with 2 words, I am. And the text says they drew back and fell to the ground. Armed men, temple guards trained in crowd control, Roman soldiers who had faced armed rebellions. They asked his name. He gave them the divine declaration, and they fell. The text does not say what caused them to fall. It records the words and the reaction together. But the connection is unavoidable. One more piece, John the Baptist. Born 6 months before Jesus, according to Luke. Older. And John says of Jesus, He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For John to say he was before me is a paradox, unless he existed before John was born, unless he existed before John's mother conceived him, unless he existed before the world existed. The forerunner recognized that the one coming after him had been there first. He claimed to exist before Abraham. He claimed the name God gave himself. But how far back does the trail actually go? Because the Bible gives us glimpses, shadows of his presence, long before the temple, long before Abraham, long before anything at all. Stones in the temple, a torn robe at midnight, soldiers on the ground. You make yourself God, before the world existed. In the upper room, he told them he came from the Father, but the trail of his presence goes back further than any of them knew, further than Abraham, further than Moses, further than the beginning of the world. Throughout the Old Testament, a figure appears who is called the angel of the Lord. But he does not behave like an angel. He speaks as God. He acts as God. He accepts worship, something ordinary angels explicitly refuse. In the book of Revelation, when John falls at the feet of an angel to worship, the angel says, You must not do that. Worship God. Ordinary angels redirect worship to its rightful object. This one does not. Genesis chapter 16. Hagar, a pregnant slave woman, alone in the wilderness, running from a household that had used her and cast her aside, running from everything she had ever known. And the angel of the Lord finds her by a spring of water in the desert. He speaks to her. He blesses the child in her womb. He tells her the future of the boy she is carrying. And Hagar, a runaway servant, a foreigner, a woman on the margin of every category that mattered in her ancient world, responds with one of the most remarkable names anyone in the book of Genesis gives to God. You are the God who sees me. She names him. She looks at him. She then says, I have now seen the one who sees me. An angel of ordinary rank would have redirected that worship immediately. This one received it and blessed her and let her go. Exodus chapter 3. The burning bush. The narrator of Exodus is precise. The angel of the Lord appears to Moses in the flame, and then, from the flame, God speaks. And the voice from the bush identifies itself with the phrase we have already heard, I am. The same words, centuries before the temple confrontation, delivered from a bush that burned without being consumed. Judges chapter 13. Manoah, the father of Samson, sees the angel of the Lord and says to his wife in terror, We shall surely die because we have seen God, not an angel, God. The dominant Christian reading, held for 2,000 years, has identified this figure as the pre-incarnate Christ, the Son of God, appearing in the Old Testament before he took on human flesh in Bethlehem. This is the historic and majority Christian interpretation held across Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant traditions. Not all scholars agree with this reading. Present it as the ancient tradition it is, not as the only possible interpretation, but as the one the Church has consistently held from the earliest centuries. Then there is Daniel, chapter 7, verse 13, a vision. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory, and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. This is the title Jesus chose for himself more than any other, Son of Man. He used it over 80 times in the 4 Gospels. Most modern readers assume it emphasizes his humanity. It does not. Daniel's Son of Man is not born on earth. He does not come up from the dust. He comes with the clouds. He descends from heaven. He receives eternal dominion directly from God himself. And he is worshipped by all nations and all languages. When Jesus claimed this title at his trial, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. He was identifying himself as this heavenly figure, pre-existent, authoritative, sharing God's throne, coming from above. But every piece of evidence so far comes from before the crucifixion, historical claims made by the earthly Jesus before he died, claims that critics can dismiss as later additions or fabrications or misunderstandings. There is one claim, however, that closes the loop entirely, because it is made after the resurrection, in the final book of the Bible, by the risen Christ himself. The Apostle John, exiled to the island of Patmos in his old age, is worshipping on the Lord's day when he hears a voice behind him like a trumpet. He turns and sees the risen Christ. And John, who had leaned against Jesus' chest at the Last Supper, who had stood at the foot of the cross, who had run to the empty tomb, falls at his feet as though dead. And Christ speaks, Fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And later, in Revelation chapter 22, verse 13, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. These are not new titles Jesus invented. In Isaiah chapter 44, verse 6, Yahweh declares, I am the first, and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. In Isaiah 48, verse 12, I am He, I am the first, and I am the last. These are Yahweh's exclusive titles, not shared with any other being, claims to sole, unique, eternal deity. And the risen Christ takes them for himself. In the last book of the Bible, decades after his crucifixion, the claim that began in the temple courts, before Abraham was, I am, is still being made after the resurrection, after the ascension, in the final vision given to the church. From the first I am to the last Alpha and Omega, the claim never changes. He never walked it back. He never softened it. He never explained it away. The evidence has built for 25 minutes. The earliest hymns, the synoptics, the I am, the angel, Daniel, the risen Christ in Revelation. But there is one passage we have been holding back, because it is the climax. It is a prayer. It is addressed to his Father, and it is the most extraordinary thing he ever said about who he was. Before Moses, before Abraham, before Daniel, before the first star burned in the black, before the world existed. We began in this room, Act 2, the upper room, Thursday night, and now we come back. The meal is over. Judas has taken the bread and gone out into the night. The foot washing is done. The teaching is done. The I am the way is spoken. The Spirit is promised. The disciples are quiet. The lamps are low. And now, the last thing before they walk out to the Kidron Valley, across the brook, up the slope to Gethsemane, where the arrest is waiting. Jesus lifts his eyes and prays. This prayer is different from every other prayer he prays in the Gospels. In Gethsemane, in an hour, he will plead with his Father, "Take this cup from me." On the cross, tomorrow afternoon, he will cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Those are the prayers of a man in agony. But this one, spoken here, in the quiet, in the borrowed room, surrounded by the 11 men he has chosen, is different. He does not speak to his Father as a suppliant. He does not beg. He does not plead. He speaks as an equal, not begging, reporting, returning. John chapter 17, verse 5. "And now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed." Before the world existed. Not the glory you planned for me, not the glory you promised me, not the glory you will one day give me, the glory I had. Past tense, personal possession, shared presence. Before the cosmos was spoken into being, before the first atom of matter existed, before the first photon of light traveled a single inch, before time itself began, he was there, with the Father, in glory. There is a sentence in Isaiah that has to be reckoned with. God says through the prophet, "I will not give my glory to another." The original context is idols. God will not share his glory with false gods carved from wood. That is what Isaiah is addressing. But the principle has weight. Divine glory belongs to God alone. And here is Jesus, claiming not merely to deserve glory, not merely to be worthy of glory, but to have already possessed it. Before creation, in the Father's presence. If God gives his glory to no one, and Jesus says he had it, then either this is the most blasphemous sentence ever spoken by a human being, or Jesus is not another. He is the one. The prayer continues. John chapter 17, verse 24. "Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world." Loved me before the foundation of the world. This is not a title, not a theological argument, not a creedal formula composed by a council. This is a relationship, the Father and the Son, in love, before anything else existed, before matter, before time, before light, before angels, before dimension. The Trinity is not a doctrine the Church invented at Nicaea in the 4th century. It is a relationship described in a prayer, spoken aloud by one person of the Godhead to another, in a room in Jerusalem, on the night before he died. And one more thing about this prayer. Something most readers miss entirely. Jesus could have prayed silently. He could have withdrawn to a corner. He could have prayed alone later in Gethsemane, and no one would have heard a word. But he prayed this prayer in the hearing of his disciples. John chapter 17 is recorded because Jesus said it, where his followers could hear it. He wanted them to know. He wanted them to remember. He wanted it on the record. The most explicit claim to pre-existence in the entire Bible was not whispered in private to his Father alone. It was spoken aloud, in front of witnesses, on purpose. He intended for this to be heard. He intended for this to be remembered. He intended for John to write it down. He intended for you to hear it right now. And here is what makes the prayer devastating. He is about to be arrested, beaten, mocked, stripped, spat on, flogged until the skin comes off his back, nailed to a Roman cross, left to die of exposure and suffocation over the course of 6 hours in front of a jeering crowd. And in these last free hours before it all begins, he does not beg for his life. He does not ask for rescue. He does not ask the Father to change the plan. He prays for his disciples. He prays for everyone who will ever believe through their word. That includes you, if you believe. And he asks his Father for one thing for himself, to return to the glory they shared before the world began. He is homesick. The Creator of the universe, standing in a borrowed room in occupied Jerusalem, hours from arrest, is asking to go home. And home is not a place on a map. Home is a presence. The presence he had with the Father before the first star burned in the emptiness, before there was a here or a there, before there was a where. He asked to go home. He did not go home. He went to the cross. And that, the choice to go to the cross instead of going home, is what changes what pre-existence means for you. He said it himself, in his own words, in his own prayer, to his own Father, before the world existed. If Jesus existed in glory before creation, if he was there when the foundations of the earth were laid, if he shared the Father's presence before the first atom, if he was loved by the Father before anything else existed, then the crucifixion is not something that happened to him. It is something he chose from outside of time, on purpose. The Philippians hymn, the one we heard in Act 3, the one Christians were singing within a generation of the crucifixion, describes it in a single word: kenosis. He emptied himself. He was in the form of God. He did not cling to it. He did not grasp it. He set it aside. He took on the form of a servant. He was made in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. He became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The Creator walked into his own creation, and his creation killed him. And he knew they would. And he came anyway. If he existed before creation, then he did not discover you when you were born. He already knew you. Every person he healed on earth, he had known before their illness. Every person he forgave, he had known before their sin. Every disciple he called, he had known before their birth. When he looked at Peter on the shore of Galilee and said, "Follow me," he was not meeting a stranger. He had known Peter before Peter had a name, before Peter's parents had met, before the Sea of Galilee held its first drop of water. When he told the Samaritan woman at the well everything she had ever done, he was not reading her face. He had known her before she was born, before her first husband, before the first mistake she ever regretted. When he wept at the tomb of Lazarus, he was not encountering death for the first time and reacting to it. He had existed before death existed. He grieved from the far side of it. And when he chose the cross over going home, he was not making a spontaneous decision in a garden under the pressure of an unfolding crisis. He was not caught off guard. He was not overtaken by events. He was completing something he had intended before the world began, before there was such a thing as a world to intend anything in. The one who prayed, "Glorify me with the glory I had with you," before the world existed. The one who could have gone home that night, back to the presence he had left behind, back to the love that predated matter itself, back to the glory that was his by right, stayed. He stayed for the arrest. He stayed for the trial. He stayed for the flogging. He stayed for the cross. There is one more thing. In a borrowed room in occupied Jerusalem, on the last free night of his life, the Creator of the universe lifted his eyes to his Father and asked to come home. He did not go home. He went to the cross before you existed. If this video blessed you, like and subscribe. On this channel, we explore the deep Bible mysteries. You can also become a member of this channel and go deeper with us. And before you go, tell us what you learned in this video. And you can check out this channel for more videos that will bless you.